Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to our webinar. Billy, if you're ready to get started, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thank you, Marissa. I am ready to get started. First, let me just say thanks everybody for tuning in. My name is Billy Rothard. I am the Center Director of Mathnasium of Tuckahoe in Richmond, Virginia. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and also thanks very much to Marissa for organizing and hosting this. There's a lot of magic that goes on behind the scenes, and I could not do it without you. The title of this talk today is On the Right Track, and we're going to be discussing how you should plan for a gifted student. And some of you might have been a participant in my previous talk where I talked about number sense and numerical fluency and how these things are critical for approaching Algebra 1 as a subject. This discussion is going to be kind of talking about, is your student on the right path for Algebra 1 and beyond through their high school years, including calculus and maybe even some courses beyond that. But the first thing that I should talk about before we dive in is some of my own personal experience and bias. So this is really important because I'm going to be referencing some statistical analysis, some studies, and also there's quite a bit of anecdotal experience here. Just got to make sure that that's all out in the open. I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things today. These things could include comparisons between some schools that I've worked with. These could be both public schools and private schools, comparisons of different math programs, talking a little bit about college applications. It's going to be important to note that I'm not really advocating for like public versus private school. I'm not advocating for any particular college or program or anything like that. It's really just me sharing some of my personal experience working as an educator, and I hope that I can help some of you parents be a little more informed as you make decisions about your students' academic future. So at Mathnasium of Tuckahoe, in sort of the western part of Richmond, Virginia, I teach a really diverse population of students from all race, ethnicity, gender. I have almost 50-50 mix of private and public school students. So I'm by no means saying that one group or school is better than another. I'm making just a lot of observations based on some anecdotal experience that I've gathered over the last 5 years working at Mathnasium and some research and analysis that I've done examining various different studies, and also my own personal number crunching because I am, after all, a math guy. So we're going to be talking about gifted math students and really what you should do if you suspect that you are raising a gifted math student. Questions like how could you best support them, and why is it important that we're talking about this kind of thing? Well, one of the reasons why we should talk about gifted math students is because there's a lot of different support systems in schools. And there are quite a few support systems in place to help students find the right path in school. We know students that need remediation, those are students that need extra support to catch up. And they'll be identified early, they'll be given extra aid. These are the students that need extra help in order to keep up with their students. But there's, a wide variety of different support structures for students that might require remediation. There's some systems in place to help identify students that are advanced, and these are the students that are gifted. They can achieve above average scores on tests and things like that. They're ready to work above grade level, and schools do sometimes have systems in place to catch these students, but it's not always the case, and sometimes students that have an opportunity for advancement will not be identified or given that extra support. So sometimes schools will identify gifted students and place them on a particular track for advancement. And this can happen as early as like 3rd or 4th grade, but I think it most commonly happens between grades 5 and 6. One of the most interesting parts of this particular piece that we're examining is that the vast majority of students actually fall kind of in the middle. These are just, your rank and file elementary school students, and there's all too often no extra examination of these students that are in the middle of the pack. Many of them are right on the edge of becoming a remedial student. They need extra assistance, and that could be easily prevented if extra support was given to them. And likewise, there are some students that are borderline gifted. If they had just a little bit more support, they could sort of jump to that next level and become a gifted math student, but they may miss the opportunity to challenge themselves if they aren't put on the right track. So we're going to start off with a quick poll here. We're going to be talking about Algebra 1 first. That's essentially the first class that we take as part of our higher level math courses. And the question here is going to be, when do you think students are most likely to take Algebra 1?
So far, it looks like we're overwhelmingly at 7th grade, followed by 8th and 9th, and then one person for 6th.
Okay. So it seemed like the majority vote there was 7th grade. That's interesting because I would have thought people would guess 8th grade, but neither of those two things are correct. It's actually grade 9. So many people would think that it's normal for a student to take Algebra 1 in 8th grade or earlier, but that's actually not true. It's most common for students to take Algebra 1 in 9th grade. We're going to talk about some stats and figures in a little bit about 8th grade Algebra 1, but most students will follow a high school path similar to the one here that I've depicted. They do something along the lines of 8th grade pre-algebra, then 9th grade Algebra 1, followed by 10th grade geometry, on next to 11th grade Algebra 2, and finally in their senior year, 12th grade, they take something like a pre-calculus trigonometry hybrid class. But what's interesting to note is that those are not all the possible classes that could be offered by your school. There's in fact many, many other kinds of math classes that you could commonly see offered at your child's middle or high school. Some of them are listed here. As you can see, there's a bunch of other types of math classes, and some of them have names that don't even clearly tell you what that class is all about. For example, Math Course 1, Math Course 2, what are those things? What's the difference between Advanced Algebra / Trig and Algebra 2 / Trig? Like what's the difference between those things? We've got Calculus, Calculus AB, Calculus BC, a couple different statistics class, Linear Algebra, Discrete Math. What are these things? What is Math Analysis? These are all common classes that you could see offered at your child's high school, and in some cases even at your child's middle school. And the reason why I'm showing you this is to just demonstrate how kind of convoluted and confusing it can be to look at all the possible tracks that your student could be on if they are if they're a gifted math student. So now some quick facts and figures while we're looking at this. It's actually the case that less than 25% of students in the United States take Algebra 1 in 8th grade, and a much smaller percent will take Algebra 1 earlier than that. It's most common for students to take pre-algebra in 8th grade and follow the track that I've displayed here. Let's take a look at this graphic that I've found. So this is a chart for the United States, and as you can see, it's color-coded. The dark, full, and robust blue-colored districts there, those are the ones that every student is, sorry, I shouldn't say every student, where all the schools that were surveyed offered Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Then there's kind of a gradient where there's some like faded out blue and some faded out red, and they offer anywhere from like half the schools, a quarter of the schools, like 3/4 of the schools offered Algebra 1. But look at how many dark red colored districts there are in our country. In these districts, Algebra 1 is not even offered in middle school. And those students don't even have an opportunity to take it in 8th grade or earlier because the school simply doesn't offer it. There's a couple things to note about this data here is I did a little bit of number crunching, and I feel like if I'm going to be a responsible demonstrator here and a responsible math person, I have to talk about some of their research methods. It's going to be pretty important, though not 100% related to our current discussion. There were some states that just didn't really participate, like huge chunks of Vermont and Massachusetts and Maine. They just didn't participate in this survey, so they're kind of out. But also, some of these districts had very different levels of survey responses. For example, it looks like the state of Pennsylvania and New York are pretty heavily in the blue category. But it's actually the case that in some of those districts, only 1 or 2 schools participated in the survey. So if one school responded to the survey and they offered Algebra 1, they automatically get a score of 100%. Likewise, in some of those Western and Midwestern states, if they're more sparsely populated area and there just aren't quite as many schools, maybe only 1 or 2 schools responded. And if they didn't offer Algebra 1, then the whole district got a 0. So most of the population was pretty accurately represented, and I think Virginia had some pretty good data collected. But you should note, if you live in Virginia and you live kind of in the Richmond area where I work, you'll notice that Central Virginia is almost entirely solid blue because we have a pretty high likelihood of students being offered Algebra 1 in 8th grade in Virginia. But it's important to note that the rest of the country, that's not necessarily the case. So for this discussion, we're going to be assuming that the listeners are raising students that are taking Algebra 1 somewhere in 8th grade or earlier. That's going to denote a student that is on the advanced track. If your student is taking Algebra 1 in 9th grade, nothing wrong with that. That's like the most common track and would be considered almost the normal track, in air quotes, of math. But when you're taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade or earlier, that's when you start becoming advanced. So let's talk about how you can make sure your student is on the correct math track. And the first thing that we should examine is exactly what those tracks are and where the different paths wind as you go from, I think really the starts kind of in 5th grade for most districts and schools and goes through Algebra 1. So that's what our next chart's going to be about. Now this thing looks a little bit confusing and in some cases intimidating. These are the various math tracks that you could be placed on for Henrico County in Virginia. Now this might be different than your particular school district or your county, and it might be different if you're in a different state, but this is at least a good model for us to examine for the purposes of our discussion. There's a lot of different ways that you can be identified as gifted. It can happen at different grade levels, and you can be placed on different tracks of math. And that's I pulled just right off of the county website earlier this year. But take a look at all the places where we see Algebra 1. You see Algebra 1 in high school, you see it in 8th grade as a possibility, you see it in 7th grade as a possibility, and in 6th grade as a possibility. Now, around where I work, kind of in the west end of Richmond, just getting into the Henrico County area, I have very, very rarely seen a student take 6th grade Algebra 1. I think I only am aware of 3 students that are going to be doing that. 2 of them are in it now, and 1 is going to take it hopefully this coming school year. But in my experience, been very, very rare. I see 8th grade Algebra 1 pretty commonly. I see 7th grade Algebra 1 a little less commonly, but it still happens sometimes. And I see high school 9th grade Algebra 1, I would say probably second most common. But as you can see, the identification starts as early as grade 5. And in many ways, your student is placed on their math track as early as grade 4 or 5. And now, why is that important? Well, it all starts with Algebra 1. Knowing when you take Algebra 1 governs much of the rest of your high school experience because that'll determine what the next math classes you take are. Algebra 1 is considered a high school math course. And in most cases, you're going to be referencing that Algebra 1 score as you apply to colleges. So if you take Algebra 1 in 7th grade, for example, your target university might want to reference that score that you got in 7th grade as you apply for colleges as a senior, which seems kind of wild. To go in depth a little bit further, I want to talk about Algebra 1 and taking it early. There's a lot of different ways you can get into Algebra 1 early. And I'm going to just go right off the bat and say my personal recommendation is that students take Algebra 1 in 8th grade if they are an advanced math student. We're going to go into reasons why, but I want to talk about all these different places where you can take Algebra 1. Okay, so first, let's talk about 6th grade. That's going to be the easiest. I think it's extremely rare for a student to take 6th grade Algebra 1. I have not seen a student in Richmond City Public Schools or Henrico County Public Schools take Algebra 1 in 6th grade. It might happen. I just haven't seen it personally. The 3 students that I have seen take Algebra 1 in 6th grade were from independent or private schools. And again, to be super clear, that doesn't mean that school system is better or more elite or more mathematically challenging. Doesn't mean that. What it probably means is that school is not catering to such a large crowd. It can make more customized decisions for each student because typically a private or independent school has a smaller population, so they can be just a little more customized. I will see students take 7th grade Algebra 1, but there's a couple of pitfalls there. Let's take a look at the grade 5 and the grade 6 school years that would precede the Algebra 1 7th grade school year. So you see a student would take accelerated math 5-6 in their 5th grade school year. They would take accelerated math 6-7 in their 6th grade school year. Then they would take algebra 1 in 7th grade. So this student was probably identified as gifted in 4th grade and then placed into an advanced math class for 5th grade. And when they say math 5 or math 6 or math 7, that's what you or I might call, basic standard 5th grade math, 6th grade math, 7th grade math. And what they're doing here with the accelerated classes is they are combining the content from 5th grade math and 6th grade math into one school year. And they can't get it all quite done, so they split up 6 between grade 5 and grade 6. So you'll do all of 5th grade math and then a little bit of 6th grade math. And then in your 6th grade year, you'll do a little bit of 6th grade math, a little bit of 7th grade math, and then bam, you're in algebra 1 as a 7th grader. And what you've done is you've effectively, pedal to the metal, sped through grades 5, 6, and 7. You've skipped pre-algebra, and you've gone right into algebra 1 for 2 years of advancement in math. That's a tough class. And again, I'm just kind of making up a statistic here, but I would say that if I were to sample all the current 7th grade Algebra 1 students, I think maybe 1 in 10 of those students are truly capable of handling Algebra 1 at that time. There's a couple different reasons for it. The first is that because you're going very quickly through grades 5, 6, and 7, and you're effectively skipping what is called traditionally pre-algebra. And what I see most commonly is when students start taking algebra 2 or pre-calculus, and they're a freshman or a sophomore in high school, they start to have struggles and challenges. And it's because their algebra 1 class was built upon a shaky foundation and some of their skills were not fully mastered. Those things start to come back and show themselves as a student gets higher and higher into their math curriculum. So algebra 1 in 7th grade is certainly a viable option. I've seen students be successful in that class. It can happen in public or private schools, about the same. No real difference there, but I think that's a very, very difficult jump. But what if your student is ready for it? What are some of the indicators? Your student is probably getting effortless straight A's in math in grades 4, 5, and 6, including the accelerated math 5-6 class and the accelerated math 6-7 class. This student is probably saying math class is boring for me, and it's so easy that I'm now becoming less interested in math because it's not hard enough. If your student is saying math is fine, I get A's, I have to work a little bit hard at it, but I can get pretty consistent A's in my math class, don't just assume that they're ready for 7th grade Algebra 1. That should be a really sort of in-depth discussion with your counselor and with your student to know if they're ready for Algebra 1. I, as a personal preference, think that 8th grade Algebra 1 is kind of the sweet spot for math advancement right now. So that's my personal take on Algebra 1, when you should take it, and sort of what indicators to look for to support your student. And just as a final note, one of the reasons why I recommend 8th grade Algebra 1 is because you're able to have a more robust math foundation. You'll take math course 5, you'll take middle school math course 1 as a 6th grader. Then when you do 7th grade, you're going to have a hybrid 7th and 8th grade class, which is going to kind of fit in that same realm as a pre-algebra course. So I think your foundation is much more secure when you go into 8th grade Algebra 1. So I often am asked by parents, what should come after Algebra 1? There's really 2 options for what can come after Algebra 1. In many cases, students will take either Algebra 2 or they'll take geometry. Let's examine Algebra 2 for a second. What if your student takes Algebra 2 after their Algebra 1 class? Now, I see this most commonly, again, in my independent and private schools. Doesn't mean that it's good or bad, it's just different. But a lot of times I will see some of my independent schools and private schools in my area, they will do Algebra 2 after Algebra 1. That would then be followed by geometry. You also might take a class called Advanced Geometry with trigonometry included as your 3rd high school class. If that's true, what happens is you usually get a pretty watered down version of trigonometry, and then it creates this sort of awkward gap between the Algebra 2 class and the pre-calculus class. So pre-calculus would be kind of your 4th math class that you take, and if you're going to take Algebra 2 as the 2nd high-level math course, and then geometry as your 3rd high-level math course, you're going to go into pre-calculus feeling like you took about a year off of traditional algebraic kinds of math questions. Personally, I don't like this path quite as much, as it places that awkward subject matter gap later in the student's curriculum where classes are harder, and having a gap between content is going to create a more risky situation if a student doesn't have their math foundation secure. What happens if you take geometry after Algebra 1? Typically, I prefer this path. You would then take Algebra 2, and the awkward gap is then between Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. Now, I'm calling it the awkward gap because geometry is not necessarily easier or harder than algebra, but it's different. It covers different material, and I think it's better for this gap to happen as early as possible because the classes are just a bit easier at the Algebra 1 level. So if you take Algebra 1, take that conceptual break and fit in geometry and then go to Algebra 2, yes, there is still a gap where you're sort of separating the algebra track of courses, but I think it's better to have that gap earlier than later. So after you've taken Algebra 2, you've taken Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry, your next class is probably something along the lines of pre-calculus or trigonometry. One of the reasons why I can't really talk about it that much is because there's almost no consistent name for that class in Richmond or Henrico County. It's very different, and it's even different in the independent and public schools too. You can call it pre-calculus and trig, you can call it trig and math analysis, you can call it just pre-calculus and they sneak in the trig. There's a lot of different names for it, but it's kind of difficult to talk about. But in that school year, your objective is to prepare for calculus and do as much trigonometry as can reasonably fit into a high school school year. But now the next big discussion is calculus. When does your student take calculus? And is your student going to take AP Calculus AB or AP Calculus BC, or perhaps both of them? Now let's remember, when I talked about the time that you take Algebra 1, you could take Algebra 1 as a 7th grader, and if that's true, you would take Geometry and Algebra 2 next, you would take some kind of pre-calculus and trigonometry class as a sophomore, and then you'd have that opportunity to take an AP math class as a junior. And so maybe you'll take AP Calculus. Well then, what would you take after you take AP Calculus? That's an interesting question. It's one of the reasons why I favor 8th grade algebra, because it gives students not only a better algebra foundation, but it makes that 12th grade school year decision a little bit easier. You can just take AP Calculus or maybe AP Stats, whatever your student's personal preference is. But what if you had an ultra advanced student and they took Algebra 1 in 6th or 7th grade? A lot of people have a misunderstanding about what AP Calculus AB offers and what AP Calculus BC offers. These classes are both considered AP courses, and so they would count as potential credit for your student's target university or college. But there's two different versions of AP Calculus. One is called AP Calculus AB, the other is called AP Calculus BC. And some people have the misunderstanding that these classes are radically different. In fact, they are not. They're almost identical. In this chart, I pulled this right from the AP handbook, the College Board AP course description of what is taught in AP Calculus AB and what is taught in AP Calculus BC. As you can see, there are 10 academic units here. The first 8 are taught in AP Calculus AB, and in AP Calculus BC, the exact same 8 units are taught. However, 2 additional units are added right at the end of the school year. AP Calculus BC, for about 80% of the school year, is a carbon copy duplicate of AP Calculus AB. So why would you choose to take that? Well, there's 2 good reasons I think you should take AP Calculus BC. The first reason is if your student performed exceedingly well in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, and their pre-calculus and trigonometry school year, I'm talking like effortless A's. This was very, very easy, came super naturally to your student. They may be a good candidate for skipping AP Calc AB and going straight to Calculus BC, because they may be looking for that more college level challenge. That's one good reason to take AP Calc BC. Another good reason to take AP Calculus BC is if your student took AP Calculus AB and they enjoyed it, but they felt like they could do better. They felt like they want to take another good stab at that class and maybe do a little bit more. If you take AP Calculus AB as a junior, you could potentially take AP Calculus BC as a senior. You'll take a different AP test. It could be evaluated differently by your target schools, and that could count sort of as a credit for colleges. Now, let's be really clear here. AP Calc AB and AP Calc BC, while they are different AP classes, of all the universities that I have worked with personally or that I've talked with, their counselors or some of the staff there, they're going to be weighed about the same. And so you're probably going to be able to test out of your Calculus 1 class in college, but just because you're taking AP Calc BC doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get any extra math credit. Not necessarily. Maybe some colleges will, but it's not a guarantee. And so this leads to sort of a precarious situation because some schools are going to offer lots of unique kinds of math classes. And this is a common pitfall, especially for schools that want to project themselves as being, ultra advanced schools. So let's talk about another topic. What if your student does that path of taking AP Calculus BC and they're a junior, so they have another class to take their senior year? I see 4 major options. Of course, there could be some more, but I've identified 4 big options here of what your student could do after they take AP Calculus BC. Well, one thing you could do is go for some other AP credit. Take something like AP Statistics. You could do AP Physics if you want to mix in some more STEM topics. There's a couple other AP classes you could take. Some schools even offer like an AP Computer Science class. Those could be good choices for your student. But again, this is kind of predicated on the idea of your student taking 7th grade Algebra 1 and progressing up through Calculus BC in their junior year. One other possible option is instead of taking more AP classes, your student could just kind of dive into their own interests a little bit better, take additional science classes, take additional like enrichment classes, like maybe another art or a music class to diversify them. Those are good options. Some schools offer additional math classes. Some schools could offer things like linear algebra, like discrete math. I've even heard of some schools offering Calculus 2 or multivariate calculus. These are kind of rare, and the times where I see this most commonly are at the public schools that have specialty centers for gifted STEM students. They could sometimes happen at governor schools, and then sometimes my independent and private schools will offer extra math classes. This is perfectly fine if your student wants to just explore new math topics, but be careful. These classes are most likely not going to be AP classes. And if that's true, the likelihood of them being accepted by your student's target university is pretty low. So here's just one quick example. I worked with a student 2 years ago in the summer 2018, and he was preparing to take Calculus 2 at the governor's school in Richmond. Well, when he applied for his university, they said, hey, that's really cool that you took Calculus 2 as a senior. You're taking it again as a freshman in college. You're not going to get out of that class because it's not an official credit. That doesn't mean that it was a bad idea for him to take it. It certainly stretched his brain. It gave him more experience. He had a fun time taking it. But just keep in mind, if these classes are not APs, you may not get college credit for them. This last option here in the bottom right corner, consider perhaps a dual enrollment for your student. It's definitely possible if your student finishes all the math classes offered by your high school. That doesn't mean you can't take another math class. See if your school has the option to become dual enrolled. So there's storms in Richmond. I lost power, but we seem to be back now. That was actually the last slide that we were on, except for the info slide, and I'm sure I'll be able to put that up for just 1 second here in a minute. But to, I guess, wrap up that conversation, what I was talking about is there's a lot of different ways you can go after you finish AP Calculus BC. I was just talking about dual enrollment as an option, and that's certainly a good option if you want to try to get college classes because they have a much higher likelihood of being accepted by your target university. Just keep in mind, some administrators or admissions offices can be a little bit prickly with paperwork being the right way. So if you don't have, official, sealed envelope transcripts and stuff, it could be just a little bit of a hassle to do that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. It's definitely a great choice, but just be advised there's lots of, there's a little bit of extra administrative work to do that. So I've got my last slideshow slide up. I'll put that up just so we can be official and end on a good foot here. This is my information. So if you have any extra questions or follow-up for me, I would love to chat with you. If you're in the local Richmond area, I would happily talk about what your particular student's needs are. And if you think you have a gifted math student and they're feeling pretty bored in their math class, a place like Mathnasium could be a good solution where we're able to take students kind of beyond what their current grade level is offering and on to more advanced things. So thank you everyone for joining me today. Thank you so much for being patient while I got some hamsters spinning in my generator to get my power back. And hopefully I won't lose any more power here. Marissa, did we have any lingering questions?
Talking about AP Stats, can you take it? Could you take it before calculus or instead of calculus?
Yeah, for sure. So the prerequisites for AP Statistics are they do not include calculus. So you can go in some cases straight from Algebra 2 into statistics. That'd be kind of a jump. I wouldn't recommend that. I think the most common path is you could go Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, whatever combination. In this case, I guess Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2 most commonly. Take your pre-calculus and trigonometry class, and then you can go right into stats, and that would include AP stats if your student feels comfortable and confident in those areas. Much of what is required for success in statistics is going to find its roots in the algebra path of school. So if you have a really, really solid Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, you're probably going to do okay in stats, and if those classes were your bread and butter, if you loved Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, stats could be a good fit for you because they're going to find lots of the same formulas and equations, like their academic roots are grown in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. Pre-calculus is certainly a good class to have before that, but I don't actually see a lot of pre-calculus concepts translating into stats. So that's why I said a student might even be able to take it right after Algebra 2.
Okay, so we have a new question. So Jennifer says, my student will be taking pre-IB Algebra 2 in 9th grade this fall. Should that not go well for some reason, what math would you recommend for him for 10th grade?
Let me ask a follow-up question. Has your student already taken Algebra 1 and Geometry? If that's true, if your student has already taken Algebra 1 and Geometry, then if it's called like pre-IB Algebra 2, in some reference that it's going to be a part of an IB program, if you've taken Algebra 1 and Algebra 1 and Geometry already, then I think your student should have the prerequisite knowledge needed as long as they performed well in those classes. Did we get an official response back from that parent?
Yes, she said that he had taken both those classes.
Yeah, so if you've taken Algebra 1 and Geometry already, then Algebra 2 should be ready. But let me add this one next description of Algebra 2. Think of this in sort of the terms of college classes. You know how college classes are numbered by these sort of hundreds systems where it's like 101, 102, or like a 200 level class or a 300 level class? I would consider Algebra 1 and Geometry kind of like 101 and 102 for high school level math classes. You definitely want to take Algebra 1 first. You can't take Geometry first and then Algebra. That typically doesn't go well. But they're of similar difficulty levels. But I would consider Algebra 2 definitely to be in that category of like a 200 level math class. It's certainly a big difficulty jump up from Algebra 1 and Geometry. And if your student has any struggles in that area, certainly, look at their math foundation from Algebra 1 in 7th grade as a possible possible point to examine, because if your student took Algebra 1 in 7th grade, they probably were on that path of fast math in grade 5, fast math in grade 6, and then bam, you're in 7th grade. And if your fundamentals are shaky in the Algebra 1 curriculum, it could propose some problems for an Algebra 2 student, even if they're a strong student.
So I guess then to make certain we answer the question well, what would you suggest if it doesn't go well in 9th grade Algebra 2?
Okay, good question. What if things don't go well? Okay, well, first option would be check out Mathnasium. Not to do like a shameless plug, but the reason I say that is because I have dealt with that exact same scenario so many times. A student does Algebra 1 in 7th grade, then Geometry, then Algebra 2. And the way our curriculum works is we specifically try to design a plan that would fill in those gaps that are making your student have a difficult time so that they essentially have the right tools in their toolkit to approach Algebra 2 confidently. If that's not an option for you for some reason, then you should just talk to your counselor and say, hey, my student is really, really struggling. I want them to have a successful school year. Is it okay for us to bump back to a more traditional or standard math class like regular Algebra 2? Things are probably going to move at a little bit slower pace there, and they may be a little bit more digestible for your student. But keep in mind, if it's really, really important to you that your student is on an IB path, which stands for International Baccalaureate, and some schools offer IB programs, your IB program might have specific requirements that says you have to take, these many IB courses in order to qualify for our IB program. And so if you drop out of that math class into a slightly easier math class, that might cause some issues with IB. So just talk to your specific school counselor, talk with your specific school administration to learn more about that.
Dual enrollment versus AP, is one better than the other?
That's a good question. So here's what I would say. You're probably going to get a more consistent experience with AP. And the reason for that is AP is so well established among high schools that you're probably going to get a more streamlined experience. The downside there is you're probably going to have fewer options. So you're going to have stuff like AP Calculus, AP Stats, AP Physics, maybe rarely an AP Computer Science class. There's some good options for AP STEM, but that's probably like 80% of the list.
So I'll say I took both types of courses when I was in high school, and the main difference is how the credits count. For AP classes, you'll take an exam at the end of the year, and you have to score like a target goal in order for that to count as a college credit. So like if you score a 4 or a 5, most schools will accept that, but there are limits there. Some schools will accept a 3. Very few schools will accept a 2 or below. As far as credit, dual enrollment, because you take that class through through a college university, usually counts a little bit better. Most schools will take that. It's still possible your class might transfer as a different type of class. For example, I took one class, I think a linear algebra class, dual enrollment, and it counted as a math like elective rather than that class specifically when I transferred over.
As far as dual enrollment goes, you're probably going to have a better likelihood that your student gets that class accepted as a credit. But the drawbacks are there's probably going to be a lot more choices and more things that your student could take as a dual enrolled student. You probably open up the doors for all kinds of intro to computer science classes. You could do intro to, you could do something like linear algebra, discrete math. You could do calculus 2. You could do just regular calculus 1. If your student does pre-calculus as a junior and you have an opportunity to dual enroll and you just take calculus 1 your senior year, that's possible maybe. The thing is, that's going to offer a lot of different options, and it also is going to offer a lot of new potential like administrative challenges. I'm trying to be careful with my words here because I don't want to talk bad about some schools, but some high schools aren't very well equipped to handle a dual enrolled student when it comes to scheduling their day. So typically a dual enrolled student will have to either take that class online or like leave the school campus and go to another school. And if your school can't line it up so that your math class would be towards the end of the day, it'd be kind of hard for you to leave school and then come back to school later. That's one barrier. If you can do online, that's a little bit easier, but then you lose the sort of teacher aspect. So there's a lot more things in play with dual enrollment. Honestly, I think your school counselor or your school administration would be the best person to ask for that. Like, I have a lot of experience with it personally, but my experience is mostly anecdotal working with students over the years.
Okay, then we have one more question in. How do you feel about students taking geometry or algebra 2 over a summer school session to try and push into an advanced curriculum?
That's tough. I have seen it work well. I have seen it not work well more often. So that doesn't mean that you shouldn't look into it. If you would like your student to be advanced and you see an opportunity to push over the summertime, I would recommend doing that with geometry over doing it with algebra 2. Algebra 2, I think, really needs a full school year and some really hands-on teacher interaction to make the transition from algebra 2 into pre-calculus successful. But since I mentioned earlier, geometry is not that much harder than Algebra 1 as far as the raw difficulty goes. It's just kind of different as far as how you think about it. It's not necessarily harder, it's just really different. So I think it's a lot more accessible for a student to take geometry over the summer to get advanced than taking Algebra 2 over the summer to get advanced. I would prefer geometry over Algebra 2 for that reason, but in general, like it's it's fine if you want your student to be advanced, but doing it over the summer, I think will have a higher likelihood of them having foundational gaps in that understanding at the end of the summer. They're going to check off all the major boxes of that class, but you're not going to be able to go as in depth as you can in the school year because you just have to do it in a much faster time. So it has worked for some students that I've worked with, but I've seen it not work out the way that the parents and student wanted to a little bit more often. But if you're going to do it, I would say do it for geometry over um, over algebra 2.
I would also say if you're going to do it, plan to have some kind of tutoring or some kind of like base support system for your student, whether it be something
100%.
like Mathnasium or it be like a private tutor, have someone else there to help out with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I kind of want to go off on just a brief tangent for that. But what we're talking about here is how to support your math student for grades like 6 or 7 through 12, high school. But I got to just be honest here. What we're talking about kind of doesn't matter anymore once you're in college. And that's kind of controversial. But I was talking with Marissa about this offline, and like Marissa, you were in an actual STEM major. Did anyone ask you what you took in your junior year? How many APs you took?
Okay, so yes and no, but only because I actually got my associate's degree when I was in high school. So I did a whole bunch of dual enrollment and AP classes.
Yeah.
So like I would walk into my advisor's office and they were like, "What is your transcript?" But outside of that, no, it was just a lot of like me being younger than everyone. Other than
Mhm.
that, there was no difference.
So I have some personal connections with University of Richmond and with VCU in some of their math programs. And to be honest, once you get past a class called multivariate calculus, no one cares what you did in high school. Multivariate calculus is in so many ways the gatekeeper class to any advanced math. If you can't get through multivariate calculus, you're toast. Like that's it. So once you get through multivariate, it doesn't matter if you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, no one cares. uh, College is kind of the great equalizer in that regard because for me personally, like I took advanced math classes in college, but I only went up to AP Calculus AB, and I actually didn't have that class counted for my college experience. So I took Calculus 1 again as a freshman. So basically, I started at freshman year, first semester, Calculus 1, the baseline, and then I went up the courses of math classes. It ended up not mattering at all because by the end, I took all the same classes everyone else did. So by the time you get into your, I guess, sophomore and junior year of college, all the decision making from grade 6 through 12 was already panned out. Like you're kind of all equal at that point. So yes, you should be giving consideration to what you do in grades 6 through 12 as far as math is concerned, but my best advice, the best takeaway would be just find what makes your student comfortable, confident, and happy. That's going to be best. Don't push your kid to extremes just because they can. Don't let a school recommend something that would be too hard for your student. That's also happened. Make your student comfortable, confident, and happy. Help them get into their target schools, and then the rest is going to kind of, I shouldn't say take care of itself because it'll be hard, but the rest of the math classes will happen as they need to in college.
I'll say, and I'll add to that a little bit. Make certain your student knows that it's okay to retake something in college they didn't quite get it in high school, or if it wasn't a very good class in high school. Because I did take multivariate my senior year, and I retook it when I got to college because we learned nothing, and I needed that so much.
Hmm.
So like, there's no harm in retaking that class to get that foundation. Because if I hadn't retaken it, if I just taken that credit, I would have had so many struggles in engineering.
Oh yeah, big time, big time. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the talk. So if you want to touch base with me, I'll happily answer any more of your questions. But otherwise, thank you so much for attending. Have a great rest of your day.